the charge for mental health at Bayside. And I'm joined today by Juli and Christian Wilson. I have a podcast called Better Days Podcast where I talk about mental health and suffering and what it means to be human and follow Jesus. Also have a nonprofit called Better Days. And then Juli and Christian Wilson have a nonprofit called Anthem of Hope. We're going to give you more information about what we do at the end, but they also speak, write, and spread awareness around mental health in Christianity. And this is a passion for all three of us, myself, Juli, and Christian, mainly because it's personal to our lives. So we're going to share our stories with you today as we're trying to help you to navigate the realities of ministry. I thought about a verse in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 and 4, as kind of what we're sharing with you today of mental health. It says this: "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in our troubles so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God." And I guess what I want to say to you today is we have lived this. And so we want to comfort you guys, and we want to help you guys to navigate the challenges and burdens and stresses of life and leadership and ministry. So let's jump in. We have some slides for you. So if you want to take notes, we'd love for you to take notes, but we're going to share 6 points along with our stories to help you to navigate ministry and the burdens of mental health that come along with that. So I'm going to jump right in. The first thing that I want to say to you guys today is you are not alone. As you are feeling the pressures and weight and stresses and anxieties and even days that your soul, or months or years that your soul feels downcast in the midst of leading, I want you guys to know that you are not alone in the midst of this. I moved to Eugene, Oregon from Hawaii in 2008. I was a director of a Bible college in Hawaii, moved to Eugene. It was an unchurched territory. The Northwest was at that time called the graveyard of church planting. And we moved there from sun to rain to plant a church to reach college students. I started at 26 years old, which is super young, and had no idea what was going to take place. We began a Bible study in our living room apartment, and within 3 months, we had 90 college students packing out our 2-bedroom apartment every single week, which at that point we realized, okay, God's doing something. So we moved into a building. It exploded in the building. We ended up having 5 services a week. Then we had to move into a larger building. Within 3 years, our third year anniversary for Easter, we had over 2,000 people. So our church, I had no idea the church was going to explode. I was a young guy. The church just exploded. And I was dealing behind the scenes with really serious chronic stress and severe anxiety. So much so that between year 3 and 5, it became worse and worse. I was beginning to have panic attacks randomly. I remember at the 5-year point, we had just celebrated 5 years. The church had multiple campuses. I was named the youngest megachurch pastor in America, which means nothing. All it meant to me was I didn't know a lot, and I needed a lot of experience to learn what I've learned. And so I remember probably right before year 5, I was beginning to black out when I was teaching. And all of this, what I was experiencing was the repercussion of dealing with stress, not knowing how to manage it, beginning to experience the symptoms of severe anxiety and panic attacks. And so when I talk about mental health, this is something that has been a part of my adult life. And it's been something that I've struggled with on and off as a pastor and leader, which prompted me to speak on it and podcast about it. And then also my wife, who has really severe illnesses. She has a major neurological condition from a car accident where she's losing her memory. We're in our 30s. And so this is a really significant. She also deals with anxiety and depression. So between the both of us, we have felt the weight of mental health in our own life. And when I began to speak on this all around churches and podcasting, I realized so many pastors would come up to me or call me or reach out to me saying, Wesley, I'm dealing with the same thing. I haven't told anyone. I don't know how to manage this or navigate this. I'm dealing with depression, or I'm dealing with anxiety, or I don't know how to manage this stress and actually be healthy as a leader in ministry. And so I realized that we were tapping into something that was really vital and important in the cultural moment that we're living through. Current stats just came out from Barna about mental health and ministry about a month ago. Here's the stats that they came up with in their recent research. Only 17% of pastors currently said their mental health was excellent, compared to 39% 3 years ago. So in a 3-year period of time, you've seen a significant decrease in mental health amongst pastors. 31% of pastors said they were struggling with emotional burnout, and 41% of pastors said they were exhausted. And I just want to encourage you, sometimes when we are all dealing with the pressures and stresses of ministry, and we begin to experience mental health conditions, sometimes we feel isolated and alone in our pain. So many of us walk through these challenges and we feel alone, but I just want you to know you're not alone. There is no shame in suffering. You're human. There should be no shame for me sharing my story. I have no shame. I share it because it's a part of my human experience as a follower of Jesus, and I want to help as many people as possible. So the first thing I would say to you today is you are not alone. Number two, learn to lead on a full tank. So as a leader, what I learned in my experience is I was often leading on an empty tank. And there's a great way for you to consistently assess your mental health with a word picture. And some of you know this, some of you don't, but this would be a great word picture metaphor for you to use when you're weekly or monthly assessing how you're doing with your mental health. You can use this word picture. Am I leading, serving, pastoring on a full tank? Am I leading, serving, pastoring on a half tank? Or am I leading, serving, pastoring on an empty tank? When you get below a half tank, that's a really important time to self-evaluate. What are the things in my life contributing to that exhaustion and that emptiness, or even being on the verge of burnout? Burnout simply is a subset of stress. And I think that it's really important for us to do consistent self-evaluations of how we're doing with our mental health. By the way, Nathan, can you throw up that definition of mental health? And this is always really helpful, especially in the Christian world where we throw out this term, but just gaining a perspective of what mental health is. Mental health encompasses a person's well-being psychologically, so the life of your mind, emotionally, your emotions are so valuable and important as a follower of Jesus, socially, which means your relationships, your social circles, your relationship with society as well, and then spiritually, your relationship with God. So all of those are, think of those things as cups to be filled. As we're doing ministry, you can take it off that, Nathan. Thank you so much. As we're doing ministry, we need to be filling up each of those cups in our life. And there's so many factors that contribute to mental health challenges in ministry. I'll just name a few that I've lived through. Pressures of internal idealism. So the expectation I have of myself, who I'm supposed to be to the people that I'm leading. Pressures of external expectations. You guys know that everybody has an expectation of who you're supposed to be, how you're supposed to do ministry and lead and live as a follower of Jesus. And then I know in ministry, there's layers of emotional burdens. So we carry a lot of emotional weight when we're leading people. We also deal with stress. And this is something that I often really focus on as a focal point of life and leadership. When we deal with stress, we often don't have a framework for it. Stress has really three parts. A stressful event, which is totally normal. We all feel it. Just like anxiety is normal, there's normal anxiety, there's normal fear, there's normal stress. But God created us in a way physiologically that we're supposed to go from the event to a recovery stage. That's where our body begins to repair itself, go back to homeostasis. But oftentimes in ministry and leadership, we go into the third part of stress, which is a dangerous subsection of stress, which is exhaustion. So our bodies continue to live in this third phase of stress, which is an exhaustion phase where we don't recover, but we continue to live in this empty state, this heightened physiological state, and our bodies wear down. And when our bodies physiologically wear down, it wears down our emotions, our mental capacity, our relational capacity, and even our spiritual capacity. So what can we do in light of that? How do we lead on a full tank? I got just a couple things for you. First, as I go around and teach seminars and conferences on this, I always talk about these two things. First, make sure that you have healthy physical rhythms. God didn't just create our souls, right? Like to talk to him and be in relationship with him. God also created our bodies. So I believe God created three key physical rhythms. Eat healthy, right? If you study psychology and biology, there's this thing called gut-brain connection that affects our mood and our mental health. And so what we eat really has a significant impact on our mental health. So eat, sleep. Our sleep cycles are so vital. My good friend John Mark Comer wrote a book recently on the ruthless elimination of hurry, and he talked about the history of sleep, how up until the light bulb was invented, people slept between 12 or 10 and 14 hours a day, something like that. So check out his book. It's worth the read. But it's quite amazing that now we live on minimal amounts of sleep, which affects our brain, which affects our body, and then affects our mental and emotional state. And then move. We were not created to be sedentary. We were created to move. And you guys can study the physiology behind this, but it has a huge impact on our mental health. And God created all those things. And the second part is healthy spiritual rhythms. You know, as a leader, it's easy to be pouring out, but not investing in our own spiritual state. So I want to encourage you guys to, as a leader, when you have a lot of output, it requires a lot of input to be healthy. And so I want to encourage you guys to make sure that spiritually, as you're giving out, you're also daily taking in. I was really fortunate to, the first church I went to was a church that encouraged us to read our Bible and pray every single day, which changed my life. And it really has been the compass and the foundation of how I've lived as a follower of Jesus, because I don't want to just be a leader. That's not my highest ideal. I want to be a follower of Jesus first and foremost. And so I want to encourage you guys to make sure that you're filling up your tank spiritually every day so you can give out in the way that your job or your role requires. And then number three, I want to encourage you guys that it's okay to reach out for help. You're human, right? Some people don't look at you as a human, as a leader in ministry. They think that you're elevated, you're supposed to be superhuman, but really we all feel the brokenness of the fall. We're all imperfect. We're all human. Ministry is really hard and taxing and emotionally weighty. And sometimes we just need help. And I remember, so going back to my story, year 5, I total burnout, which meant I was stressed for too long and my body began to wear down. It's like a rubber band. If you continue to stretch it out, it loses its elasticity, part of me. And I was at that point. And so my encouragement to you guys is when you hit those points in life, my dog, this is real life Zoom, that's my dog. When you hit those points in life, reach out to someone. We were not created to solve our burdens and our complexities and our mental illnesses and challenges on our own. We were created to have a relational home to process our pain. And so whether that's a pastor or a friend or a therapist or a mentor, I need a relational home. So I went to Wayne Cordero, who's a mentor. He wrote a book on burnout. He's phenomenal. And he flew me out to Hawaii. I connected with a doctor of psychology who walked with me for over a month, processing what I was going through, helped me to get healthy. Wayne encouraged me. Being in Hawaii was also really helpful for my mental health. And I reached out and it was life changing. So if you're a leader and you need a friend, a mentor, a therapist, a pastor in the moment that you're living through, or maybe it's a year from now, I just want to encourage you, it's okay to reach out for help. So those are the first 3 points. Now I'm going to pass it to my friends, Juli and Christian Wilson, and they're going to share their story and another 3 points to help you guys navigate this reality.
Hey guys, can you hear me okay? Awesome. I'm so stoked to be with you today. My name is Juli Wilson, and I am a mom and a writer. I live in beautiful Southern California, but I'm originally from Memphis, Tennessee, which is about 3 hours out of Nashville. Most people kind of know where that's at, more than Memphis usually. And until about September, I was a pastor's wife for 7 years. I was married to Jared Wilson. You've probably maybe heard of him. I don't know. He's a blogger. He was an author for a long time, a pastor here in Southern California as well. And so everything that Wesley was just saying, it just hits home so personally about the burnout and the struggle and just the weight and the pressure that comes along with helping leading others. And it is a calling. It's something that I think God calls you to. And so you take it really seriously when it's something that is going to help other people, but is also something that God has laid on your heart as your life mission. And it's something that I think if you're not careful, sometimes you can kind of take it all on your own plate and not rely on God to do it. You kind of feel like it's your job and that you have to make everyone happy and that you have to, fill in the gaps for everyone who's hurting or needs a word or needs prayer. And that's kind of where my husband found himself most of the time, I think, is just dealing with a bunch of pressure, just pressure to perform, to be turned on, I guess. And I don't know if any of you can relate to that. I know I can. I think that we all have that, whether we're, working at a Starbucks or a pastor on a stage. I think we all have the same pressures on us that people expect a certain version of us at all times. And he really fell under that weight a lot. I mean, I did too, but because of his underlying issue with mental health and his struggles with mental illness, he really took it to heart in a deeper way than I think any of us ever could have known. And I don't know how much you know of our story, but Jared was very open about his struggles with depression and anxiety and just feelings of worthlessness. And he often said, I don't want to die. I don't know how to live. Like, I don't know how to keep living this way. My mind doesn't shut off. I have so many thoughts constantly saying I'm not good enough or that I'm never going to be enough. But then I know what God says about me. And I know, that he has a plan for me that's good. And he just had this like internal battle at all times between, his flesh and his battle with mental illness, and then what God had called him to. And God had called him to such a beautiful ministry. And he took that, not lightheartedly. He really wanted to do his best. But there was always this friction. And this friction that I don't think anyone knew he dealt with as deeply as he did. But he was very open about what he was going through. And he was so vulnerable. And it was such a beautiful thing to see in the church. And I don't say that just as his wife, just as a believer in general, to see someone get on a stage and say, hey, I'm going to teach you today, but please know, like, I'm leading from my brokenness. I'm leading from a place of pain and hurt sometimes. And I don't have it all together. And I'm struggling just like some of you. So just know that when I'm teaching this to you, I'm not teaching it at you, I'm teaching it to us. And he just had this really beautiful way of connecting with people. And so for the last 7 years, that's what we did. We traveled the world. And then obviously we were planted at a church locally here as well and just poured into people. But around August, I started noticing a little bit of a change. He started getting, really burnt out, super tired. And he noticed it too. And because we were so open about things, he talked to me about it. He didn't hide it. He didn't try to cover it up or anything. We talked to the pastors at church about it. And he just said, I think I need a break. I think I kind of need to just take a few steps back for a minute and just relax, maybe spend some time with my family, get away to the mountains. Because anyone who knew anything about him, his happy place was like with a fishing pole. He didn't need much else. He didn't need any fancy things, fancy cars. He was a super simple guy. But if he had like a fishing pole in the mountains for 2 days, he came back a new person. And we kind of thought, he's in a little bit of a funk. He needs to get away for a day or two and we'll be good and we'll get back and we'll be ready and, we'll go serve and do our thing. And that's unfortunately not how our story ended, or his story. He ended up taking his own life in September 10th, actually. So we just hit the 9-month mark. And honestly, it was something that I don't think just shook my world. I think it shook the whole church. And I think that's because it's such, kind of like Wesley was saying, such an unheard of thing. You know, we don't expect pastors to be broken like that. We don't expect that they could ever have feelings of not wanting to live. I mean, they preach the gospel, right? They talk about this life that's amazing, that has a future and a hope for us. Like, how can they believe that, but also go on and do something like Jared did? And so I think the church was hurting and grieving and confused, and I was right there with them. I mean, I lived with him obviously every day the last 7 years, and I didn't see it coming. None of us could have. He didn't. I think it was just one of those things that kind of just happened. And I know that sounds so crazy and people want answers, and I wish I could give them to you, because I think I'm at the top of the list of people looking for answers of how could something like this happen. And I've learned to let go of needing answers, and instead I'm clinging to what I do know, is that God can use anything for good, and that even in the darkest moments of our lives, my greatest fear was always losing Jared. I didn't need much in life either. As long as we had each other, I felt like we were going to be good. You know, we had our 2 kids. We had this life that I kind of dreamed about my whole life, you know, get married, have some kids, serve God, and we're good. I mean, we had faith in the Lord, and we had to trust him for things like anyone else, of course, but it wasn't like I had to be down on my knees all day, every day, asking God to meet my, you know, every single need. I had a nice house. I had a beautiful family. We had a good job. Like, things were going pretty well. So I didn't really have to have this like crazy faith in God. I really didn't. And when this all happened, my whole world obviously crumbled. And I had to decide, okay, am I going to back off and blame God and ask him, how could you allow this to happen? This guy gave his whole life to you. You know, he was serving you so faithfully, God. And, you know, then this, like, how would you let this happen? If you're a good God, why would you allow this to happen? And so I could have either kind of dove into that, or I could choose faith and to choose to keep hoping and keep believing that God is good. And that even if my deepest, darkest, you know, fear happens and I find myself in a situation that I would never wish on anybody, am I going to believe that he's still good? And I'm going to trust that he has plans for us that will prosper. And so that was my first initial thing before I even tried to dive into what was going on with Jared. What even happened was, okay, do I believe who God says he is? Do I believe that he does have plans for us that are good? And so I decided, okay, God, I'm going to jump into this faith journey with you in a way that I never have before. And I'm trusting you, and I am going to listen to you and to let you lead out on this. And so as I've looked back, because I think there's a beauty in looking back on what happened and taking some time, which is what I've done. It's been several months, obviously, since he passed, and looking back on things that I might not have noticed before that was going on with Jared, that you might have felt before, or that if you're like me, you might have someone in your life that you're trying to support or help, and you might notice things in them, just things like fatigue. I never noticed, you know, how tired he was. I knew he was tired, but we all are. We have 2 kids. He had a job. I thought it was like, hey, we're all tired. Of course, let's go get some sleep. You know, tomorrow you'll be good. And it was a different kind of tired. It was a soul tired. And if you notice, like, any of your friends, I don't know, maybe not as interested in things as they used to be, not wanting to get out as much, not really excited about anything, you're not hearing from them very much, those are some surefire signs that something might be up. And that's unfortunately some stuff I didn't really notice all that often, because it can kind of disguise itself as normal life. I think Wesley, you kind of pointed to that. You know, we all have things that happen that can stress us out, and you know, sometimes some people don't feel comfortable opening up to tell you how badly they really are hurting and how much they really do need someone to just talk to or someone to listen. And like you were saying, someone in ministry like Jared, you know, there usually isn't that freedom to do that freedom to kind of let your wall down and say, hey, you know, I know that you have me up here on this pedestal and you see me as this, and I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for the position God put me in, but I'm like here today. I'm not at that place, and I'm struggling and I'm hurting. And I think so many people don't feel that freedom. And I know there's people in your own circle that feels that way. It might be you. You might be feeling that way in your room today, wondering, would anyone care if I wasn't here? Would anyone notice? Does my life have purpose? And I mean, especially in this time we're living in right now, where we're all stuck at home and we're isolated more than ever. It's really hard to get up and believe that God has a future that is beautiful for you when you haven't had anyone text you all day, or if you feel like, you know, my job was non-essential. I'm non-essential, you know, like I've kind of always known that I'm average. You might start buying into those lies of, this is all I really have. Why am I still here? I mean, do people really need another barista at Starbucks? I mean, is that my life? Is that all I'm going to do? And the answer is yes, you're so needed. There's nothing that could change that fact. I don't care what you've done in the past, what you'll do in the future, what people have said about you, what you've done. You are so needed here, and God has a purpose and a plan for your life. There is no darkness in your life that can overtake his power and his light, but it will try to, and it will lie to you until you cut it off. You have to learn to just cut those lies out and replace it with God's truth. And that sounds so easy, and it sounds really cute when we're sitting here and nothing's happening. But in those dark moments in the middle of the night when no one's around, and those fears start creeping in, and those doubts, and you start thinking, man, maybe I would be better off just gone, and maybe everyone around me would be better off without me. You have to remind yourself that God has so much more for you, and that he does have a purpose for your life. And Jared knew that, and I think that's a big struggle a lot of people have, is, well, if he knew that, if he really believed that God had this plan, then how did this happen? And I think the answer is, there is no answer that we could ever understand. Only Jared knew what was going on in his mind, and that gives me peace that I don't have to try to understand that. It gives me peace that God knows, and that although he didn't ordain this, he would never wish for this to happen. Suicide breaks his heart. It breaks everyone's heart. We've seen the aftermath of that in my life, and my boy's life, everyone who knew Jared, and anyone who's ever dealt with anything like this. But he allowed it to happen. And I think in Jared's specific situation, the only way I can find peace with that is knowing that it's being used to help other people. And so we're taking it and we're running with it. And that's why I'm speaking here today and talking to you guys. But I don't want you to ever think that that's an answer or that's an out. Like, I firmly believe that Jared knew the Lord, and that he's in heaven, and that's beautiful. And God can, redeem anything, any past, any sin. If you say yes to him, it doesn't matter what you've done, where you've been, your eternity is sealed. It doesn't matter, the last 3 minutes of your life on earth don't change what he did on the cross. And so I firmly believe he's in heaven, but that does not mean that suicide is an option ever. Like, just know that you do have so much worth and so much value, and you are so needed, and that God has a purpose. If your heart's still beating in your chest, you have breath in your lungs, you are here for a reason, and other people don't have to recognize or see that or call that out for it to be true. You have to believe that in and of yourself. And on the days when you can't, get around people who can remind you that of those truths. And you need those people, whether you have to pay for them or not. Hey, I'm all about counseling. There's been times in my life where I didn't have a super tight friend group, and there wasn't a lot of people that I could really lean in and pour into. There's no better investment than your mental health. So even if you have to go pay to talk to someone, it's so worth it. And we all need it. Just, mental health aside, the state of the world in general, we should all be sitting down with a counselor right now, saying how we feel and processing. So don't feel crazy. Don't feel like you're messed up if you feel the need to go talk to someone. We all do. We were created for it. And we need it. We need people to walk this journey with us. And so in my particular situation, which is, kind of unique, we had a pretty public life, which now is even more public since Jared's death. All that I've noticed in the wake of his death is that his biggest fear, I think, in life was not being needed. And it was so mind-boggling to anyone who knew him, because we all needed him. He knew everything. Like, he was the guy you could go to. He had the answers, and if he didn't, he figured it out. He was just really good at everything he did. So from the outside looking in, we were all like, well, of course you're needed. I mean, I had no clue how many questions a day I asked him until he was gone. I'm like, gosh, I wish I could text him and ask how to do all these things. And, he would sit down with me and just say, do you think anyone would notice? Like, if I just didn't show up here or didn't go there, do you think they would notice? And I just have to tell you, if you're feeling that way, people would notice, and you're so needed. Your life is so valuable. It doesn't matter if you're where you think you're supposed to be yet. That's something we kind of idolize. It's like when we get to the house, when we get the kids, when we have the husband or the wife, and when we get to that point, then we'll be needed, then we'll be successful, then people will, have time for us. And that's just not the case. Those things are beautiful, and they're a gift from God, just like anything else. But your value hasn't changed anymore today than it will if you get your dream job tomorrow. Like, your value and who God says you are isn't dependent on anything you can do. And so in those moments when that fear creeps in, you just have to remind yourself. And that's so churchy to say, but it's just the truth. There's nothing else that can lighten up that kind of darkness. That's all that there is. And I'm preaching that to myself as I'm walking through this, because I've never dealt with mental illness issues. I've never struggled with depression. I'm almost overly optimistic, which is really annoying to most people, because I just am. The glass isn't half full, it's full. We'll figure it out. We'll work it out. There's nothing we can't get through, and we've got this. It's going to be fine. But I found myself when Jared passed just not feeling that way. I hit rock bottom really quickly, and I thought, God, are you there? Do you care? Does my life matter? How do I live without Jared? We have these kids, and my life feels just chaotic now, and maybe I can't do this. And I didn't question whether I wanted to live or not, but I knew I didn't want this life. I knew I didn't want to be a widow, and I didn't want my kids to not have a dad. And so I questioned my worth and my value. Who am I now that I'm not a pastor's wife? What am I going to do with my life? Do I have a voice? Do I have the ability to speak up? Do I have the authority to speak up? I don't know about you, but I didn't grow up dreaming that my life mission would be to talk about suicide and depression. I really didn't. I mean, especially, like I said, being optimistic and happy-go-lucky, that just wasn't anything on my radar. But God said, this is what I'm giving you. And I've had to choose to see value in it, even when I don't feel it, and when it feels heavy and it feels like a burden to talk about it, and when it feels just wrong and like something I would never wish on anyone, to accept it as a gift because God gave it to me and allowed it. And you might find yourself in a situation like that today where your life's really heavy and what's on your plate isn't beautiful or glamorous or seen as significant, but God has given it to you, and He doesn't just give you the life and say, just run with it and figure it out on your own. He gives you the ability to do every single thing in front of you, one step at a time, one yes at a time, one step of obedience at a time. And that's where I'm at. I get up every day, and some days, I'm good and I feel happy and I'm with my kids and life's good. And there's other days I cry and I have my moment, and then I go wash the dishes, and you go with it, and you allow God to take you step by step, minute by minute, breath by breath, and try not to look too far into the future because you can't control it. Not focus too far on the past because it's gone, but to try to really just be present and, lay down your burdens before the Lord. And thankfully Scripture says when you do that, He'll be there, and he'll care for you, and He'll hold your heart through it. So yeah, your life matters. Don't let anyone tell you anything different, because you're so needed, so needed.
Yeah, that's so good, Julie. And for those of you who don't know me, I am Christian Wilson. I am Julie's brother-in-law. I was Jared's brother, and I am one of the co-founders of Anthem of Hope. And this is the perfect segue into our second point, that your mental illness does not equal lack of faith. So a little bit about me. I grew up in a church, and this might be a lot more common than I think it is. But I grew up in a church where I was told that mental illness was some sort of unforgiven sin, or that God was punishing me for something that I had done. I was diagnosed with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, when I was about 5 years old, and I was diagnosed with chronic depression when I was about 10. And so for me, as a 10 or 11-year-old, hearing somebody in my church tell me that I had some crazy sin that God hadn't forgiven me of, or I didn't have enough faith, and that's why God hadn't healed me, that hurt, and I had no idea what I could do. And it ultimately ended to me walking away from the church for a little bit before God revealed to me His truth, which is that my mental illness did not define my faith, that I wasn't defined by what my mental illness was labeled as. I wasn't Christian who is depressed. I wasn't Christian who has obsessive compulsive disorder, but I am Christian who is a son of God, the living King. And I want to go over real quick, just to really point this home, the amount of biblical characters that struggled with some sort of depression or asked God to end their lives. We have Job, David, Elijah, Moses, Jonah, some of the most prominent biblical figures that asked God to take their life. They said, God, why am I alive? Why am I going through such tragedy? Why does everything seem so dark and I cannot see the light at the end of this valley? And that just goes to show you that this is not something you are in alone. This is not something that is new. This is not something that God does not have an answer for. This is something that people have been dealing with forever. And it does not mean that you lack faith. It does not mean that your relationship with God, that He is punishing you for some sort of unforgiven sin. I want to go real quick into the story of Job. I was going through these characters. I wanted to go to David, and then I wanted to go to Elijah. And Job just really kept speaking to me, because in Job 1, verse 1, it says, there was a man that was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. In another translation, it says that he was someone who had the most faith. And at the end of this book, actually, I'm going to go through it. It says that Job cried out to God, "Why did I not perish at birth and die as I came from the womb? I have no peace. I have no quietness. I have no rest, but only turmoil. I loathe my very life. Therefore, I will give free rein to my complaint and speak out in the bitterness of my soul." This is someone who at the very start of this book was called blameless and to have the most faith of anyone alive on the planet. And he told God he did not want to live. He told God he had no reason to live. You have to be in a very, very dark, depressed spot to tell God that you wished you wouldn't have been born out of the womb. And I want you to understand that I'm not saying this as a way to make this dark or make depression feel like this big problem that can't be solved. There are ways to fix it. God absolutely can heal, but we have to understand that God can heal, first of all, and second of all, that it is not a lack of faith that is causing you to go through these things. We live in a fallen world, and with that comes illness. Just like any other illness, there are mental illnesses. There is depression, there is ADHD, there is anxiety, OCD, PTSD. There are so many different things that are categorized under mental illness. And Wesley did a fantastic job about explaining what your mental health is, your all-encompassing wellness. And I want to be the first, if you haven't heard it before, to tell you that there is a difference between your mental health or your mental wellness. Everybody has to take care of that. Everybody has to make sure that their spirit and their body is in a good place, that their connection with God is in a good place. But then there is mental illness. And the Psychiatry Association of America describes it as this: mental illnesses are health conditions involving changes in emotion, thinking, or behavior. They are associated with distress, problems functioning in social, work, or family activities. And most importantly, that mental illness is common. A lot of people see mental illness as something that can't be seen, that it's this taboo subject because we don't know what's going on with it, when the fact is that we do. It is an illness that affects how your brain transmits signals to the rest of your brain to tell you to be happy, to tell you to be sad, to tell you when to be joyful. And someone who is struggling with a mental illness, a health condition, is the same as someone who is struggling with a cancer or a diabetes. They need to see treatment. It is not a lack of faith. There are illnesses in this world, and mental illnesses accompany that. And as a church, I think we really need to do a better job at differentiating those two, that we need to tell everybody your mental health is important. You have to focus on your mental wellness. Take care of your body, take care of your mind, take care of your soul. But then we also need to recognize the difference between that and mental illness and see it for what it is, which is an illness. And that will lead Juli and I into our third and final point, which is that hope gets the last word. And Juli, if you could open up, I think this would be a fantastic intro for you to talk about this.
Yeah, so it's actually really interesting. I've been studying through the book of Romans recently, And right at the beginning, I think it's in chapter 4, it talks about Abraham and how obviously God told him he's going to be the father of many nations, which he thought was hilarious because he's super old and that doesn't make sense. How would his wife have a baby? She's really old. Like, that's really funny, God. That will never happen. But God gave him this promise that he would be the father of all these nations. And it says at the very beginning of it, and it just hit me differently as I read this the other day. And it literally just says, when there were no signs of hope, Abraham clung to hope. And I've been really like chewing on that and thinking about it the last few days, because if you look at my life specifically, now there's starting to be a little bit of glimpses of hope here and there, thankfully. But for the last several months, the last 9 months, that just wasn't the case. It's been very dark. It's been very sad. It has been everything I was used to as, you know, having as my comfort, my husband first and foremost, our home that we lived in, the job that it wasn't even just a job to us, it was our ministry. So that was our family, basically, our church family, and our friends and everyone we were used to. Literally everything was wiped away. Obviously, Jared passed in September, and I had a few months to still be connected at the church. And then as the rest of the world shut down, my world shut down too. So there was no longer that outlet to go to be surrounded by the community that had been lifting me up and really taking care of the boys and I during the last several months. And so I had to kind of come face to face with God and just say, okay, God, here we are. You've wiped everything out of my life that I'm used to, every comfort, everything that's familiar. I'm living in California. I'm not from here. I've been here about 2 years. So we've made some roots here, you know, but it's not home. I'm not around the people that I grew up with, or the people that I would say, besides my family, like Christian and all of the Wilson family. I'm not around the people that I would have wanted to be around in a time like this when we can't leave our house and I have 2 toddlers, which if you are in that position, God bless you. You're doing it, and you need to add it to your resume by the end of all this, because that's some serious work and you crushed it, because it's another level of crazy having 2 boys at home and just trying to grieve. And so for the last several months, I really had to choose hope. I had to choose faith and know that even when I can't see what God's doing and I have no evidence of it changing anytime soon, I have to decide whether I'm gonna have faith in him or not. And for me, that was kind of hard, because I always kind of thought of hope as a feeling. You know, it's like something that you get excited, or you're like, yeah, God's going to come through. I feel it. I can just feel it. And sometimes that is hope. Sometimes God gives you the gift of that excitement and that feeling. And other times it's a choice. And I think you have to decide that in the midst of this darkness, when I'm, you know, putting the boys to bed, carrying them in from the car after a long day, and you know they weren't ready to sleep, so I'm driving around town for an hour to try to soothe them to sleep in the back, and no one sees, you know, and those hard moments where I'm in the front crying, missing my husband, wishing that things were different, wishing it could be normal. It's moments like those that I found myself really having to decide, what do I believe? Do I believe what God says? Do I think that even in the midst of something like this, he could bring good? And half the time it was me choosing to believe that, even though there was no hope around. I can't tell you how many times I'd get the kids out of the car and they're asleep, and they're very big children. They're huge. My boys are massive, trying to lift them over my shoulder, carry them into their bed. And I can't tell you how many times I would just verbally out loud say, God, I can't do this. I don't know how you expect me to. I don't know if you got the wrong girl here. I don't know what you're thinking, but I'm choosing to believe, because you're allowing me to live this moment right here, right now, with these 2 little boys, that there is hope for us, and that there's a purpose, and there's a plan. And it's literally you just speaking that and saying it. And I ask God probably 10 times a day, God, my feelings aren't here. I'm going to trust you until they catch up. Help my feelings to catch up. But even if they don't today, even if I don't get to that happy feeling, that excited feeling, that warm feeling that oftentimes does come along with hope, I'm choosing it. And so regardless of what you're going through today, just know there's no loss that you can experience that can separate God's hope from you, his plan for you, his goodness for you, his love for you. And I can say that wholeheartedly now in a way that I never could before, because after losing Jared, it was the closest I've ever been to giving up on hope and on what God has for me, because it almost felt pointless. It's like, if this is it, if this is what you have for me, God, I don't want it. I know you use brokenness, but I don't want this. This is not the path I choose. And I'm thankful I didn't choose that. And I'm thankful that God always gives you the option of hope, as long as you're willing to trust him in the darkness. And with that, I think a beautiful way to see that is that we know the darkness doesn't last forever, right? The best is always yet to come with God, because the best is ultimately eternity in his presence. So we know goodness is coming. We know that the end is going to be good, and that we're going to be at peace, and that we're going to be well, and that life's going to be good, and it's going to be as he intended. We just have to be willing to put up the fight, and to be willing to show up every day and believe that all these things God says are true, even when the world's falling apart around you. And I can tell you in a way I never could before, it's true. He is real. He is there. Hope is available. It's accessible. You just have to choose it. And sometimes hope, it's just that little bit of fight to say, I'll try again tomorrow. That's hope too. Hope's not this warm, fuzzy feeling or beautiful thing you can post on Instagram. Sometimes it's saying, I'm choosing you again today, God. I'm hoping and believing that you're going to come through. Even if there's, chaos surrounding me, I'm trusting that you are who you say you are, and he is, and he will come through. And surround yourself with people who believe that too. That's one of the biggest things for me. It was obviously very hard being isolated over the last few months, as it has been for everyone. I mean, no one was created to live like that. God wanted us to have someone from the get-go. It's why he made Eve to begin with. He didn't think it was good for us to be alone, and that's because it's not. We need people. So if you find yourself isolated or feeling sad, misunderstood, like you need someone, just reach out. And vice versa, if you notice that with your friend, reach out to them, because hope's available. And sometimes hope comes through the form of a person. I can't tell you how many times my hope has been increased by someone reaching out, or someone at just the right moment stopping by, or calling, or just checking in. So maybe you could be someone's hope today. And that's the beautiful thing about being in the body of Christ, is he uses us as his vessels, and you could be a literal living, breathing version of hope to someone near to you, a family member, a friend, someone you see at the store. I mean, it's as easy as saying, like, you look nice today. That can be the word someone needs. And hope doesn't have to be this huge, mysterious, crazy thing. It's just this little belief in your heart that God's going to do what he said he's going to do, which is to give you a life that matters.
Yeah. And Julie, the other day when we were talking, you said this phrase to me, and it's something that I really wanted to touch on, especially when you were just talking about how you had never been so close to being hopeless after Jared passed. We were talking at Arcade, and you said tragedy brings clarity. And that stuck with me. And it is so true that there are some things that we go through that we see no light at the end of that darkness. But because of that, we're left alone with God. And because we have no other distractions, it brings clarity more than we could have had in any other circumstance. And there was a verse that you brought up that you had finally seen in a different light about Abraham. And there was one that I've been reading too. It's Jeremiah 29:11, which forever I kind of threw off as almost a cliche verse. Like it's a feel-good verse people throw around when they don't really know what else to say, but they want you to be okay with what's going on. And with everything we've gone through, I want to read it to you guys again, just because it makes so much more sense, especially if you're struggling. He says, "For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans for good and not for disaster, to give you a future and to give you hope." And I mean, when you are in the darkness and you feel that there is no light at the end of that valley and you are surrounded on all times, David said it best, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." Tragedy surrounding, he saw no light, but he will not fear evil because God gave him the clarity that there is a future and that there is a hope. And with that,
So good.
Wesley, I would love to bring you back in. Perfect. You're already here.
It's amazing. Julie, I loved how you painted the picture of hope. And I think often in Christianity, we think of hope as like this state of happiness and joy and what have you. But I loved how you talked about hope is something we choose even when things are hard. I use this term when I teach about hope called honest hope. And I really think that's the picture that the Bible paints of hope. Romans chapter 8, Paul's, dealing with suffering. He's speaking into suffering. And he says, we're groaning. We are all groaning, longing, awaiting for the day that we are going to gain sonship, which essentially is the, eternity, the redemption of our bodies. And I think what he's saying there in the context of hope is that sometimes hope means that we have to be honest that things are hard, right? Like it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to
Yeah.
be human. It's okay to struggle with a mental illness in ministry. And I think sometimes we think, wow, like I'm in ministry, I'm a leader, I'm a public figure. Um, I have to put on this ideal that I don't have any struggles or I have life all together. But that's just not reality. It wasn't for Paul, who gave his autobiography of suffering in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. His life was really tough in ministry, not easy. And he talked about daily anxiety that he dealt with. And we can hope while also feeling the reality of the pain and the struggle. We can have an expectation for the future, which essentially that's what hope means, and choose that each and every day. Choose to believe that there are better days ahead. Choose to believe that the best is yet to come with Jesus. Um, but also acknowledging and sitting in our pain. And I guess that's something that I wanted to encourage you guys in. I know we have about 8 minutes left. I'm going to give you guys all the points on a slide. So you guys who are note takers, you can write them down. And then I'm going to give you information for Juli and Christian and then myself, where you can reach us in the things that we're doing. But I wanted to say that, it's important for you to deconstruct some false notions in Christianity or false notions that we've built in our minds. And to be free to know that God is going to use your pain, your suffering, and your struggles and your humanness in ways that he can't use you powerfully in any other way. Like I think Rick Warren said it. He said something like, your greatest ministry will come out of your greatest source of pain. And I truly believe that's been the story of my life. I've written stuff, I've preached to lots of people. None of that has been as impactful as the story and the passion that God has given me. And I think Juli and Christian would say the same thing. It's hard, it's painful. I would have never signed up for it, but God uses it because it's relatable to people. And so the more vulnerable we are with our story and the stuff that we're going through, the more people are going to be able to relate to us, because they're like, I'm just waiting for somebody to open up the door to let me know that it's okay for me not to be okay as a follower of Jesus, and to help me to navigate it. And sometimes just hearing a story like Juli and Christian have shared with us, thank you guys. Just hearing someone's story gives you the hope that you need to keep going. So, wow, love you guys. So grateful for all of you that joined us. Let me throw up the slides real quick. So don't leave us yet. We're gonna give you these slides if you want to take notes, and then also leave you with some info how to follow what we're doing. Nathan, can you go down to the 6 points? So if you like taking notes, you can throw these on your iPad, your phone, your notebook, whatever you use. You are not alone. Learn to lead on a full tank. It's okay to reach out for help. And then the next 3, your life matters. Mental illness does not equal lack of faith. And I love how we ended this. Hope gets the last word. And I think what makes that so powerful and real to me is that Juli and Christian have lived it. And this is a motto that has been an anchor to them and can be an anchor to so many of you as well. And then here's how you can follow along with what I'm doing. Nathan, if you could throw that up. You can follow me on social media, Better Days Podcast or Wesley Towne I am the third, so Wesley Towne the third. You can follow my podcast where I talk about mental health and suffering. I just did a season around COVID-19 and mental health in this moment, so you can follow along with that. And then I've had Juli and Christian on my podcast, as well as many other people that have spoken so powerfully into this reality. And then you can follow Juli and Christian. Here's their social media info. Anthem of Hope, if you go back to that. It's Juli Wilson. That's Juli's Instagram. And then Christian John W. That's Christian's Instagram. And then their website, Anthem of Hope, they put out so many great things. And then one thing that I appreciate almost on a daily basis is a verse that Juli posts, and she highlights something in the verse, and it's so relatable to human suffering, mental health, hope, and just God's presence in the midst of pain. So make sure to follow her. You will definitely be encouraged. You can take it off that screen. One last encouragement, Juli and Christian, if you would have anything to say before we close up today, what would you tell everyone?
I think I would just say, just keep going, just take it, like I said before, one step at a time, and know that you already, before you even did anything this morning, before you made a single decision or had a single thought, were already enough. You were already on God's radar. He was already looking out for you. Scripture says, when I rise and when I go to sleep, he's watching out for you. He's there and he's present. And so just know that regardless of what happens today, tomorrow, what happened yesterday, you are seen, you are valued, you are loved, and you are so needed. And don't let anyone tell you different, because the God of the universe, whose voice shakes the mountains, can make people tremble, can, literally create the earth. He said it with a word. That's the voice that's speaking into you. And that's the loudest voice. It should be the only voice that you allow to define who you are and what you bring to this world. And he says you're good, so believe it.
So good.
Yeah, and piggybacking off of what Juli said, I love that even though God is so powerful and so supernatural and so supreme, the Bible says that he knit each and every one of us together in our mother's womb. God had a hand in every single person's creation. God has a purpose for your life. God has a plan for your life. Nothing about you is a mistake. God has a hand in everything. He had a hand in your creation. He has a hand in your future.
So great. What a great way to end this session. We are so glad you joined us. You can throw up a little reaction at the bottom of the screen for Juli and Christian. There's thumbs up, there's clap hands. You guys are amazing. Follow along with what they're doing, what I'm doing, and hopefully we can be a source of encouragement into your lives. Hope you enjoy the next 2 days of the Thrive Conference. Tomorrow's going to be amazing. Rick Warren, Simon Sinek, so many people, Lecrae in the morning, amazing people speaking. So make sure to check those out. And thank you for joining us today.